A police officer finds a steel door hidden deep in the winter forest, and something behind it is trying to break out. Stay until the end. You won't believe what rises beneath the town. Like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. The forest had never been this quiet. Officer Mark Doyle moved through the narrow trail with the heavy, deliberate steps of a man who had walked this route for years, and yet suddenly felt like a stranger in his own patrol zone. Snow pressed under his boots in slow, muffled crunches, the cold biting into his face as he scanned the tree line. The air was sharp, still, almost frozen in place. Even the wind seemed to avoid this part of the woods tonight. The complaints had started 2 weeks earlier. First, it was a single elderly man claiming he'd heard a low hum under the floorboards of his cabin in the middle of the night. Then a woman reported tremors rolling through the ground like distant waves. Someone else said they saw light flickering between the trees long after midnight. Usually Mark would laugh this off as winter stress, hallucinations brought on by isolation and freezing temperatures. But the calls kept coming, and they all described the same thing. Something beneath the earth. Tonight he felt it too. Mark paused and waited, letting the silence fill his ears. A faint vibration traveled upward through the soles of his boots, soft, slow, rhythmic. Not natural, not the wind. The snow around him sat untouched, stretching in smooth white sheets between the trees. But a few meters ahead, something interrupted that perfection. A line of deep impressions, evenly spaced, carved into the snow like the tracks of heavy machinery. Except there were no roads here, no vehicles, no logging equipment allowed. He crouched down beside the first of the strange marks, brushing his glove across the compacted snow. Whatever had passed through here weighed more than any SUV he'd ever seen. The trail moved straight ahead, cutting through the pines with absolute precision. Mark's pulse started to climb. He followed. At first, the tracks were all he focused on, but soon he noticed something else. The trees. Their trunks stood unnaturally still. Not a single flake fell from the branches overhead, despite the gentle drift filling the rest of the forest. The deeper he walked, the more obvious it became. The stillness wasn't just eerie. It was deliberate. Finally, the trees opened into a narrow clearing, and he stopped breathing. There, built directly into the face of a massive rock formation, stood a metal door the size of a garage entrance, its surface covered in alternating black and yellow hazard stripes. Snow had collected on the upper edges, but not on the center. The faint warmth radiating from the middle had melted it away, revealing the steel beneath. At the center of the door was a rectangular locking mechanism with a small red indicator pulsing steadily. Mark had patrolled this area for 10 years. He knew every cave, every fallen tree, every abandoned hunting shack. This door had never been here. He stepped closer, breath steaming in the cold air. As he approached, a soft electronic hum rose from the device on the door, like it sensed his presence. Snowflakes landing on the metal sizzled and vanished. Mark reached for his radio. "This is Officer Doyle. I need a—" The sentence died. The radio hissed with silent static. No signal. He tried again. Nothing. He glanced around, searching the sky as though that might explain it, but the quiet above him had no answers. He moved toward the door, raising a gloved hand to brush snow aside from a small metal plate near the lower corner. The letters were faint under a thin sheet of frost, but after wiping it clean, the text emerged. Object IC-7. Authorized personnel only black level access. Required unauthorized entry. Prohibited. Black level. That wasn't police. That wasn't federal. That was something else. He backed away slowly, instincts firing. The ground vibrated again, stronger this time. Mark froze. The vibration wasn't coming from around him. It was coming from behind the door. A deep, metallic thud shook the clearing. Snow fell from nearby branches. The red indicator on the lock blinked faster. Mark's throat tightened as he stared at the thick slab of steel. Whatever was inside wasn't dormant. It was moving. He stepped backward, gripping the handle of the flashlight on his belt, though he knew it would be useless if anything went wrong. Another thud echoed from within, followed by a slow, grinding noise, like gears waking after years of silence. "No, no, no," Mark whispered under his breath. The door vibrated harder. Snow dusted off the metal edges. A low droning sound leaked through the seams, pulsing like a heartbeat too big to belong to anything human. He reached for his radio again, even though he knew it wouldn't work. "Dispatch, do you read? I've got a—" Static crackled. He took another step back. And then it happened. A single, sharp, metallic strike boomed from inside, so powerful the ground beneath him trembled. Mark flinched, stumbling sideways. The flashing red light froze. For a split second, everything went still again. The wind, the forest, the vibrations, all of it stopped. Then a small object slid out from the bottom edge of the door and landed in the snow with a soft pluff. Mark stared at it. A badge, a police badge. He crouched down slowly, hesitating before picking it up. Snow clung to its edges, rust ate at the corners, but the name was still visible. Officer D. Harland, missing 10 years. Declared dead. No remains ever found. Mark's mouth went dry. He looked back at the door. Someone had pushed this out. Or something. He stood up, heart pounding. The metal door emitted a low hiss, followed by a click. The locking mechanism twitched. Then, with agonizing slowness, the heavy door began to shift. A narrow vertical line of darkness appeared as it started to slide open. Warm, stale air breathed out from the black opening, brushing against his face like the exhale of something waking up. Mark took one step back, then another. Lights flickered deep inside the tunnel, far beyond where the door had opened. A faint, distorted shadow moved across the illuminated corridor, not human-shaped, not animal-shaped, something elongated, uneven, wrong. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Just then, a sharp crack echoed behind him. A branch snapped under someone's boot. Mark jerked around. The forest, moments ago silent, now felt crowded. Someone was there, watching. The door behind him groaned wider. The clearing filled with the sound of slow, heavy breathing from inside the dark. And Mark understood. He was no longer alone in this part of the woods. Mark didn't dare turn his back fully to the metal door, yet the presence behind him, the crunch of snow, the subtle intake of breath, forced him to shift his stance. He angled himself so he could see both the widening opening and the tree line. The forest no longer felt empty. Whatever watched him was close enough to snap branches underfoot, close enough to breathe the same frozen air. But nothing stepped out, only silence. A gust of warm air rolled out of the growing crack in the steel door, thick and damp, so out of place in the winter cold that steam curled up around Mark's boots. The smell hit him next, metallic, harsh, like hot machinery mixed with something organic, something that didn't belong underground. The shadow inside the tunnel moved again, jerking like a broken silhouette. A stuttering, uneven limb brushed the dim light and retreated. Mark's fingers tightened around the badge he'd picked up. Officer D. Harland. 10 years gone. 10 years of unanswered questions. And now his badge had been pushed out from a sealed door in the middle of nowhere. He forced himself toward the metal plate near the lock, brushing more frost aside. The warning stood out clearly now. Object IC-7 authorized personnel. Only black-level access. Required unauthorized entry. Prohibited danger. Internal containment. Internal containment. Mark murmured. Containment. Of what? A deep vibration rolled through the ground again, stronger than before. Snow shook loose from branches overhead, drifting like ash around him. The red indicator on the locking mechanism stopped blinking, then flared bright, drowning the clearing in a sharp crimson glow. Something scraped on the other side of the door, not metal on metal. Metal on something harder. Mark stepped back. The door's lower hinge hissed, then the entire slab of steel lurched. The gap widened, swallowing the light behind it. Inside, the corridor was long, reinforced, and old. The concrete had cracked in jagged patterns, exposing darker layers beneath. Faint warning lights lined the ceiling like watchful eyes. Their glow tinged the cavern with sickly orange. A shape crossed the corridor again, this time slower, taller. Mark's throat tightened. He couldn't fully see it, but he could hear it. The sound of heavy, uneven footsteps dragging across the metal floor, each one echoing like a weight much larger than a human could produce. The warm air pulsed outward with those footsteps, like the tunnel itself was breathing. He raised his flashlight and pointed it at the door. The beam cut into the darkness, but couldn't reach whatever moved deeper inside. The shape hesitated, distorted by distance and shadow, then retreated out of view entirely. Mark let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding, and then the hair on his neck lifted. He wasn't alone in the clearing. He turned sharply. A trail of faint footprints had appeared where there had been none, minutes earlier. They led from the tree line toward him, the impressions crisp and deep in the snow, as though left by someone wearing heavy tactical boots. But no one had passed him. No one visible had moved through the trees. The footprints ended just 5 feet from him, and then stopped, mid-step, as if their owner had vanished into thin air. Mark steadied himself. He forced his radio on again. "Dispatch, if anyone can hear this, I need immediate." A sharp burst of static cracked through the speaker, louder than before. Violent, almost like a scream trapped inside the device. He flinched and dropped it. The radio landed in the snow with a soft thud, speaker hissing weakly. Then the metal door behind him slammed with a violent jolt. Not closed, open, wider, another foot, maybe 2. The tunnel lights flickered. Mark crouched, grabbed the radio, and turned back toward the entrance. The warm air rushing out now carried a low vibration that rattled in his teeth. Something inside was reacting to the open door, reacting to him. He swallowed hard. He stepped closer, slowly, fighting every instinct screaming at him to run. He brought the flashlight beam directly onto the floor just inside the threshold. Dust coated the ground, except for one set of marks. Clear, lonely tracks, disturbed recently. Footprints, human footprints, leading deeper into the tunnel. Harlan's. He leaned in. The footprints weren't uniform. Some steps were normal, others dragged, as if the person had been limping or pulled. A few prints were smeared, pointing sideways, like they were resisting something. But there were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no debris, nothing. Just the trail. Mark felt his stomach twist. The warm air grew hotter against his face. The metal around the doorway trembled. Lights along the ceiling began strobing with irregular pulses, their glow syncing with the vibration. Something deeper inside groaned, a mechanical throb mixed with an unnatural, almost organic resonance. A sudden clang echoed from behind him. He spun around again. A piece of the snow-covered rock wall had broken free and fallen. Perfectly timed, almost deliberate. Beneath it, half buried in the frost, something else gleamed. A second badge. His breath fogged in front of him as he knelt and dug it out. This one belonged to Sergeant Howard Jensen Missing. Also 10 years ago. Mark stared at the name, his blood running cold. 2 officers. Both vanished a decade earlier. Both now connected to a door that shouldn't exist. He whipped around toward the entrance. The shadow inside the tunnel moved again. Slower. Closer. And this time, Mark saw enough detail to know 2 things for certain. It was no human, and it was watching him. A massive, elongated outline leaned just beyond the spill of orange light. The angle of its limbs was wrong, as though joints bent in directions they shouldn't. A faint glimmer rippled across its surface. Not skin, not fur, something else. The creature took another step forward. The lights flickered violently. The metal door suddenly lurched and groaned, as if attempting to close. But something inside forced against it. The hinges screamed under pressure. The vibration intensified, spreading through the ground in heavy tremors. Snow cracked beneath Mark's feet. He staggered back. The breathing from inside grew stronger, loud enough to echo out into the clearing. Mark's instincts took hold. He backed away from the door entirely, moving toward the tree line. The warmth radiating from the opening now felt like a furnace. He didn't know what was happening inside, but whatever lived in that buried structure was approaching the surface. The steel door jerked again. A deep, guttural sound rumbled from the darkness. Not mechanical, not human. A low, resonant growl. Mark's chest tightened. And then, a sudden shift. A click. A heavy metallic lock engaged desperately from the inside. With a violent slam that nearly shook the trees, the massive door slammed shut. Snow splashed outward in a wave. The red indicator light snapped back to life, blinking rapidly, then slowing, then steadying. Silence. No breathing, no movement, no shadow. Mark stood alone in the clearing, shaken, clutching both badges in his numb hands. But even as the forest quieted, the message was clear. Something inside IC-7 had tried to get out, and something, or someone, had barely stopped it. Mark kept his back toward the steel door for as long as he dared, retreating until the tree line swallowed him in its shadows. His breath escaped in harsh bursts, fogging the air as he moved deeper between the pines. The silence pressed against him from all sides, broken only by the faint hum radiating from the sealed entrance behind him, a hum that had not existed minutes earlier. Something inside that tunnel had awakened. Something had forced the door open, and something had been strong enough to push it closed again. Mark clutched the 2 old police badges so tightly, the metal dug through his gloves. Harland, Jensen, both missing for a decade, both emerging from a place no one knew existed. Every instinct in Mark's body screamed that he needed backup, needed witnesses, needed someone else to see what he'd seen. Because the alternative was madness. The tracks in the snow were gone. The footprints that had suddenly appeared earlier had vanished as though new snowfall erased only those specific impressions. But the flakes weren't falling. The air around him was still. He scanned the shadows. Someone was here, or several someones. He stepped backward, deeper into the darkness. That was when he heard it. A faint click. Metal. Close. He pivoted instantly. 3 figures emerged from between the trees, silent as ghosts, dressed head to toe in matte black tactical gear. No badges, no unit marks, no lights. Their faces were hidden behind black masks with tinted visors. The only movement was the slight rise and fall of their chests. Steady, controlled, professional. They approached in a triangle formation, spreading out with precision that made Mark's pulse spike. The one in front spoke first, voice distorted by a modulated filter. "Drop the badges, Officer Doyle." Mark froze. "Who are you? What the hell is this facility?" Again the voice, flat, toneless. "Drop the badges." He tightened his grip. Not happening. The lead figure gave the smallest nod. The operative on the left raised a weapon. Not a gun Mark recognized. Bulky frame, unfamiliar silhouette, no visible barrel. It emitted a low hum, the same frequency that came from the metal door. Mark held up his free hand. "I'm an officer of the law. Identify yourselves now." "You have no clearance for this location," the leader replied. "Your presence compromises containment. You were not meant to find this site." That door opened, Mark said. "Something inside is active. Something dangerous. 2 officers went missing out here 10 years ago, and Officer Harland and Sergeant Jensen are classified," the leader cut in sharply. "Information regarding their disappearance is restricted at Black Level designation." Mark stared. "Black Level isn't a real clearance tier." "It is above real," the leader said. The operative aimed the weapon higher. Mark stepped back. "You have no right to." "You were warned once," the leader said quietly. "Warned? By whom? When?" A cold realization hit him. The footprints, the sudden static on his radio, the falling rock that exposed Jensen's badge. Someone had been watching him long before this. Mark lowered his voice. "If you're here to contain that thing inside, containment is under control." It didn't look under control. None of them reacted. The leader moved a step closer. "Officer Doyle, hand over the evidence. Immediately." Mark's jaw tightened. "These aren't evidence. They're officers. They deserve to be—" The operative on the right lunged. Mark twisted, dodging the grab, snow crunching violently under his boots as he yanked the badges away. He backed deeper into the trees. The operatives didn't chase, not immediately. They moved with brutal calm, adjusting their positions to corner him. "Running is not advised," the leader said. "Our orders are to extract the badges, not you." "Extract," Mark echoed. "What does that even mean?" "This forest, this door, this object, none of it exists, and neither do the people involved." Mark's heart hammered against his ribs. What happened to Harland? To Jensen? For the first time, the leader's visor tilted upward, a subtle, deliberate acknowledgement. "They were not taken," the leader said. "They were retrieved." Retrieved. Before Mark could respond, a deep rumbling vibration rolled beneath them, stronger than any before it. Snow lifted off the ground in trembling waves. All 3 masked figures tensed. The leader snapped something into an earpiece. "Confirm. Is this surface activity? Repeat. Confirm." A distorted voice crackled faintly through their comms. The leader stiffened. "Doyle," he said, turning back to Mark, "the door should not have opened. Something is progressing inside IC-7. If you have encountered anything—" A sharp metallic crack exploded from the direction of the door. The forest shook. A light, bright, unnatural, flared between the trees behind them. All 3 operatives turned sharply toward it. The one holding the weapon adjusted something on the device. It began to emit a rising electrical whine. Mark swallowed. "What is happening inside that tunnel?" The leader didn't answer. Another tremor rolled through the ground, stronger than the last. Snow slid off branches across the forest in cascading sheets. A loud, dragging noise echoed through the clearing, metal scraping metal. It sounded like the door was being pushed again. Mark's skin crawled. All 3 operatives instantly shifted into formation. The leader spoke without turning. "We have to return to the door. Doyle, stay away from the structure. That is an order." "I'm not leaving," Mark said. "I saw something inside, something alive. Tell me what it is." The leader paused. "You saw nothing." "That's not an answer." "It is the only one you're cleared to hear." The operative stepped past him, weapons raised, moving toward the clearing with unnerving synchronization. Mark followed several paces behind, careful, wary, silent. They didn't stop him. They knew he couldn't change what was coming. When they reached the edge of the clearing, Mark saw it, a faint glow seeping from the cracks around the steel door. Orange, pulsing, breathing. The door trembled. A deep, rhythmic thud pounded from inside. The lead operative raised his hand. "Stand by, if the lock fails." The rest of the sentence never came. The ground jerked violently beneath their feet. The steel door buckled outward. A blast of superheated air exploded from the seams, scattering snow in a violent burst. The operative staggered. Mark shielded his face as the heat rushed over him. The light from inside grew brighter. A long, low, resonant sound rumbled from the depths, not mechanical, not metal. Alive. Mark felt the operatives' fear without seeing their faces. Their steps faltered, their breathing hitched. And then the leader whispered one phrase, one Mark was never meant to hear. "It's waking." The words froze him. The operatives regrouped instantly, retreating into the trees. Mark remained where he stood, the badges heavy in his hand, fear anchoring him in place. He turned toward the door. The lights inside flickered violently. The breathing grew louder. And for the first time, Mark understood the truth behind those warnings. IC-7 wasn't a structure, it was a cage, and whatever it held was stronger than the steel meant to trap it. The air in the clearing was still trembling when Mark forced himself backward into the cover of the trees. The masked operatives had already vanished, absorbed by the darkness between the pines, as though they had never been there to begin with. Their footprints left no trail. Their presence dissolved as abruptly as it had appeared. But the forest didn't quiet. The deep, rhythmic thud from behind the steel door reverberated through the ground like a heartbeat too large for the world above it. Each impact sent a wave across the snow, cracking the frozen surface beneath Mark's boots. The glow leaking from the door's seams pulsed brighter, then dimmer, then brighter again, in sync with the pounding beneath. Mark's instinct screamed to run. Instead, he turned and sprinted through the trees, navigating the familiar path with a speed he didn't know he still had. Branches clawed at his sleeves, snow burst upward under each step. He didn't stop until the forest thinned and the dim silhouette of his patrol SUV appeared between the pines. He dove in, slammed the door shut, and turned the key. The engine stuttered, then died completely. The headlights flickered once and shut off. The dashboard went black. Even the interior lights refused to respond. The vehicle felt more like a frozen carcass than a machine. Mark tried again. Nothing. The hum coming from deeper in the woods grew louder, so loud it vibrated the metal frame of the vehicle. He sat in the darkness, gripping the steering wheel, refusing to let panic take full control. Finally, with a surge of adrenaline, he grabbed his gear and stepped back outside into the bitter cold. He needed out of this forest. He needed witnesses. He needed someone, anyone, to see the truth before it vanished the way the operatives had. The trail back to town felt shorter than usual, though every minute was stretched by the constant tremors rolling beneath the snow. When he finally reached the edge of the forest, where the first streetlights of Pine Valley flickered through the trees, he stopped to catch his breath, leaning on a wooden sign marking the boundary between town and wilderness. Everything felt strangely normal. No lights flickering, no humming, no vibrations. It was as though the forest had sealed the terror inside itself. Mark made his way down the icy road toward the police station, his boots tapping rhythmically. The night shift dispatcher, Claire Reddick, looked up from her desk as he burst through the front doors. "You look like hell," she said, startled. "What happened?" Mark didn't answer immediately. He placed the 2 rusted badges on the counter. Claire's expression shifted instantly from concern to confusion. "Where did you—" Mark, these two were— I know who they belong to, he interrupted. I found them at a sealed underground facility in the West Woods. A door, something behind it, forced its way out. I saw shadow movement, heard it. And there were tactical operatives, unmarked, armed, trained, not military. They tried to take the badges. Claire blinked, stunned. Mark, that area's been uninhabited for years. It isn't uninhabited, Mark said. It's hiding something dangerous. Claire stood. Let me get Captain Rhodes. No, Mark snapped. Come with me. Right now. Bring your camera. Flashlight. We're going back out there. She hesitated. Mark, this sounds— Please, he said, voice cracking with urgency he didn't intend to show. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Give me 2 minutes. They left together, taking her patrol truck. The woods looked different on the return. The trees seemed closer, the silence deeper, the path narrower. Even Claire noticed it. Feels colder, she murmured. But the deeper they went, the more Mark's dread grew. Something was wrong. Very wrong. When they reached the clearing, Mark expected to see the door waiting. Silent, menacing, sealed tight. But instead, there was nothing. No steel, no concrete, no clearing. Just smooth, undisturbed snow and a perfectly solid wall of rock where the door had been. Not a crack, not a scrape, not a trace that anything had ever been there. Claire stared, stunned. Mark, there's nothing here. It was here, he said through clenched teeth. You have to believe me. There were footprints, light, heat, badges. What badges? Mark turned. Her face was pale. The badges you put on my desk, they're gone. Mark felt his stomach drop. That's impossible. I put them in my pocket. He reached into his jacket. Empty. He checked every pocket, every compartment. Nothing. The hum beneath the earth had stopped. The snow was untouched. Even the branches overhead looked undisturbed. The woods appeared as though no one had walked here in hours, maybe days. Claire stepped toward him. Mark, maybe you need to— Don't say it, he warned. Don't you dare say it. She closed her mouth. He turned away, fighting the panic clawing at his throat. Let's go, he muttered. I'll show Rhodes the place myself. Bring equipment. Dig if we have to. There was a door here. I saw it. They returned to the station in tense silence. But the bad news came immediately. Every camera footage from Mark's patrol shift was blank. His body cam files were corrupted. His vehicle GPS showed his last known location miles away from where he actually had been. His dispatcher logs were missing entries. Even his radio timestamps had been reset. Everything had been wiped. Everything except the terror inside him. That night back home, Mark sat alone in the dim light of his living room, staring at the floor. The forest outside his window looked black, endless, indifferent. Then the house trembled. Just once. A small vibration rolling beneath the floorboards. He froze. Another tremor followed, deeper this time, raising dust from the corners of the room. And then, a low, slow, heavy sound traveled through the ground. A sound he recognized instantly. Breathing. Something beneath Pine Valley was alive. Something that had been locked away in IC-7. Something that had not been contained. Mark placed his hand on the floor. The vibration pulsed once more. Stronger. Closer. Right under his home. The tremor passed, but the silence that followed was worse. Mark stayed crouched on the living room floor, palm pressed to the boards, waiting for another vibration. His breath was shallow, barely moving his chest. The house stood still, the kind of stillness that wasn't peaceful, but watchful. Every shadow felt sharper. Every sound mattered. He lowered his head until his ear nearly touched the floor. Nothing. But the memory of that low, cavernous breath lingered in his mind like a scar. He stood up slowly. His pulse beat fast, but his thoughts were cold and methodical. Whatever IC-7 had been hiding was no longer in the forest. It was no longer behind a steel door. It had moved, or had been moved directly beneath Pine Valley. And the people who had built that underground prison were nowhere to be found. No operatives, no badges, no evidence. Everything erased with precision and speed, except for the tremors. He moved through the dark house, grabbing his phone, his flashlight, his jacket. The screen flickered but stayed black. No signal, no battery reading, no response. As if the device had been quietly gutted of life. He tried turning it off. Nothing. On. Nothing. Dead. Not drained, disabled. He shoved it into his pocket and stepped outside. Cold morning light clung faintly to the sky. Snow sparkled across the yards, untouched, serene, ignorant of what pressed beneath it. Mark scanned each house on his street. Most were still dark. A few porch lights were on. Everything looked normal. He walked down the sidewalk until he felt the tremor again. Faint. Underfoot. Directed. His eyes drifted to the storm sewer grate in front of him. A thin wisp of warm vapor drifted out between the metal slats. In winter, at dawn, from underground pipes that should have been frozen. Mark knelt and hovered his hand close to the grate. Heat pulsed upward, not boiling, but unnatural. The same warmth that had poured from the open steel door in the woods. He swallowed hard. Footsteps crunched behind him. He turned. Captain Rhodes approached with tight shoulders and a forced calm that didn't match his eyes. "Mark," Rhodes said quietly, "what are you doing out here at 5 in the morning?" Mark rose slowly. "You felt it too?" Rhodes didn't answer right away. "I felt something, but ground shifts aren't uncommon. Frost heaves, underground springs." "Cut it out," Mark snapped. "You know what's under the town. You've known longer than I have." Rhodes stiffened. "That's enough." 2 officers were taken 10 years ago, Mark continued. Harland and Jensen. Their badges showed up in front of a steel door that shouldn't exist, and now that door is gone. Rhodes exhaled slowly. "I need you to come with me." "Where?" "Station." "No." Mark shook his head. "You're not dragging me into a room and making this disappear." "You think I'm trying to silence you?" Rhodes asked. "I don't think," Mark said steadily. "I know." Rhodes looked at him long and hard, then something in his expression shifted, subtly, quietly. Not anger, not patience, fear. "Get in the car," Rhodes said. "Now." Mark didn't move. The tremor hit again, stronger this time. Both men instinctively widened their stance to keep balance. Snow dusted off the roofs around them. A dog down the street barked once before falling abruptly silent. Rhodes' jaw clenched. "That," Mark said, "isn't a frost heave." Rhodes opened his mouth to respond. The ground cracked. A narrow, jagged fracture split across the street, ripping through the thin layer of ice. A deep rumble rolled from beneath them, like a living growl rising from a throat larger than any creature above the surface. Mark stumbled back from the grate, flashlight trembling in his hand. Rhodes reached for his radio, but static exploded from it so violently that he dropped the device with a wince. Mark backed away from the widening crack. "Tell me what IC-7 is." Rhodes didn't answer, not because he refused, but because he couldn't. Something shifted beneath the pavement, the same dragging metallic scrape Mark had heard inside the tunnel in the woods. Except now, it was under an entire neighborhood. Rhodes stepped closer to him, voice low, urgent. "Listen to me carefully. You are not authorized to know what's beneath Pine Valley. And yet it's literally under my feet." "It shouldn't be," Rhodes said. The facility was sealed decades ago. Whatever activity you saw in the forest, whoever opened that door, they shouldn't exist anymore. Mark blinked. Who are they? Rhodes looked down at the cracks slowly stretching between them. Not military, he said. Not government, not anymore. They were shut down, or so we believed. And IC-7? Rhodes swallowed. A containment site, built around a biological anomaly discovered during federal excavation projects. An anomaly that exhibited mobility, acoustic mimicry, and high-level environmental adaptation. A creature. Rhodes closed his eyes as if bracing for the reaction. Yes. Mark processed this with a hollow calm. Why hide it under a town? We didn't, Rhodes said. They did. The rumble below them turned sharper, louder. A deep thud shook the street like a heartbeat hitting the underside of the world. Then the sewer grate in front of Mark jolted upward, a violent metallic rattle that sent a jolt through his entire body. Rhodes grabbed Mark's arm. We need to evacuate the area. The streetlights flickered. The tremor surged upward, rattling window panes and mailboxes. And then, everything stopped. The cracks sealed, the grate stilled, the vibrations died. Not gradually, immediately, like someone flipped a switch. Mark and Rhodes remained frozen, listening, waiting for the next quake. The silence stretched longer, until Rhodes exhaled shakily. It went dormant. This isn't dormancy, Mark said. It's movement. He crouched down, placing a hand on the asphalt. No shake, no breath, no warmth, only an eerie emptiness. He stood up slowly. It's not under us anymore. Rhodes looked at him sharply. Then where? A distant alarm wailed through the morning air. One long, piercing siren from the center of town. Mark turned toward the sound. City Hall. The ground under City Hall was old, weak, unreinforced, and whatever had been beneath the forest had just relocated directly under the heart of Pine Valley. Rhodes grabbed his keys. Get in, now. Mark didn't argue. They sped toward downtown, snow spraying behind the cruiser. As they approached City Hall, Mark leaned forward in his seat, eyes widening. The entire building was trembling. Panels rattled, windows quivered. Lights flickered wildly. People ran from the entrance, shouting, slipping on the ice, fleeing into the snowy streets. Rhodes slammed the brakes. Mark jumped out before the car stopped moving. The ground shook again. A deep, thunderous groan vibrated through the soil, so loud it resonated in Mark's teeth. Energy pulsed upward, warping the air above the pavement. A man stumbled past Mark. The basement! Something's down there, something's... A roar cut through the air. Not animal, not mechanical. A low, resonant, layered sound that did not belong anywhere on the surface of the earth. City Hall's foundation cracked down the middle. Heat surged upward in a molten breath. Mark shielded his face as a blast of steam burst from the seams in the pavement. And then, light. Blinding, orange rhythmic light shooting upward through the cracks, the same as Mark had seen behind the IC-7 door. Rhodes grabbed Mark's shoulder. Back, now! But Mark didn't move. Because through the light, through the heat, through the trembling earth, he saw a shape rising inside the broken foundation. Tall, elongated, wrong, the same silhouette from the tunnel, but now fully free. The roar grew deeper. Panels of the building peeled upward, snow melted around their feet. And in that moment, Mark understood one final, horrifying truth. IC-7 had never been a prison. It had been a warning. And now the warning was out. What escaped from IC-7 is only the beginning. If you want part 2, let me know in the comments. Like the video, subscribe, and share where you're watching from.